The restaurant buzzed softly with the sound of clinking glasses, quiet chatter, and the faint notes of music drifting from the speakers overhead. It was one of those high-end places where every detail was polished and perfect, from the folded napkins to the gold-trimmed menus. But behind that calm surface, the staff were constantly moving, refilling glasses, clearing plates, and making sure every customer felt like royalty. Among them was a young woman named Lena. She had been working there for almost 2 years, balancing trays and smiles while keeping her real dream tucked safely inside her heart. When she wasn't at the restaurant, she played piano in her small apartment above a laundromat across town. The keys were chipped, the stool squeaked, and one of the pedals barely worked, but it was hers. It was where she felt free. Lena had grown up loving music. Her late mother used to hum lullabies while folding laundry, and when Lena was 6, she'd saved up enough coins from tips at a corner store to buy her first used keyboard. That sound, soft, imperfect, full of feeling, stayed with her through every hard moment that followed. But dreams didn't pay rent and life didn't wait for anyone, so she found herself working double shifts to survive. That night, the restaurant was hosting a private dinner for a group of wealthy business people. They were the kind of guests who never looked twice at the waiters, unless they needed something. Their laughter filled the air, loud and careless, as bottles of expensive wine were opened one after another. Lena moved between tables quietly, balancing plates on one arm, smiling politely even when no one looked at her. She was used to it. The rich came and went. The staff stayed invisible. Still, she kept her head high and her service flawless. It was around 9 when he walked in, Ethan Cole. Everyone in the restaurant recognized him. His name often appeared in the news attached to words like millionaire, tech empire, or real estate investment. He was in his early 30s, tall, sharply dressed, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that made everyone else shrink a little. The manager rushed to greet him, nearly tripping over a chair in the process. Ethan was the kind of man who enjoyed being noticed. He ordered the most expensive bottle of wine without looking at the menu, and made sure his voice carried just enough for others to hear. His table was soon filled with his friends, men and women dressed in sleek clothes, laughing too loudly as if the night belonged to them alone. Lena took their order, standing patiently while Ethan barely looked up. His tone was smooth but dismissive, as though he was speaking to an automated system rather than a human being. "And make sure it's fast," he said, waving a hand carelessly. "We've got more important things to talk about than food." "Yes, sir," Lena replied softly, jotting down the notes before stepping away. The evening went on like that. Laughter, music, and more wine. By the time the main course was served, the group was loud enough that even the kitchen staff could hear their conversation. Most of it was about deals, profits, and who owned what. Lena didn't care much for it, but she kept her pleasant expression, trained by years of customer service. When she walked past Ethan's table again, she was humming quietly to herself. It was a habit she'd picked up while working, soft tunes to calm her nerves. Tonight, it was a melody from Chopin, one she had practiced hundreds of times at home. She didn't even realize she was doing it until Ethan turned his head sharply toward her. "Wait," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Was that you?" Lena froze, holding the tray close to her chest. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to disturb anyone," he chuckled. "Disturb?" "No, not really. I just didn't expect a waitress to sound like she's practicing for a concert." His friends laughed. The tone wasn't friendly, it had that sharp edge of mockery. Lena's cheeks warmed, but she kept her voice steady. "I just like music, sir. That's all." Ethan leaned back in his chair, a smirk forming on his face. "You like music? What does that mean? You play something?" Lena hesitated. She knew how this would sound. "Yes, piano. I've been playing since I was a child." The table erupted in light laughter. One of the women raised her glass. "Oh, how lovely," she said in a teasing tone. "Maybe she can perform for us sometime." Ethan laughed too, clearly entertained. "A waitress and a pianist. That's a first." Lena smiled politely, pretending it didn't sting. "It's just a hobby," she said quietly. "I practice when I have time." Ethan wasn't done. "You know, I have a grand piano at my place. Maybe I should invite you to play for one of my parties. My guests would love to see that." The laughter grew louder. Lena nodded once just to end the conversation, and excused herself before anyone could say more. She walked quickly back to the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, the noise of clattering pans and sizzling oil wrapped around her like a shield. She leaned against the counter for a moment, taking a deep breath. One of the other waiters, an older man named Paul, noticed her pale face. "You okay, kid?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron. "Yeah," she said after a pause. "Just tired." Paul gave her a knowing look. "That group out there, right? Don't let them get to you. People like that, they forget we're human." Lena nodded, forcing a small smile. "I know, thanks, but deep down the sting lingered. It wasn't just the words. It was the way Ethan had said them, as if her love for music was a joke, something beneath him. That night, when her shift finally ended, she walked home through the quiet streets, her feet aching and her thoughts heavy. The city was asleep, but the lights from her apartment window guided her home. She dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes, and sat down at her old piano. The keys were cold under her fingers. For a moment, she just sat there staring at them, thinking about the laughter that had followed her all evening. Then she began to play. Soft at first, then stronger. The melody that filled the room wasn't Chopin this time, it was hers. Something raw and aching, born from long nights and quiet dreams. The notes told her story in a way words never could. The exhaustion, the hope, the way she still believed, somewhere deep down, that music could take her somewhere better. Hours passed. The clock struck 2 in the morning before she finally stopped. Her hands trembled slightly, but she felt lighter. Music always had that effect. It gave her peace even when life didn't. Across town, Ethan's party continued into the night. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses echoed from his mansion. He didn't give another thought to the waitress he'd mocked earlier. To him, she was just another face in the crowd, another servant who came and went without leaving a mark. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The next few days went by as usual. Lena worked double shifts covering for a sick coworker, smiling through the exhaustion. She thought little of that night, except when she caught herself humming again and quickly stopped, afraid someone might overhear. Yet something inside her had changed, a quiet determination, the spark of pride that refused to be dimmed. Then, one afternoon, as she was clearing a table after lunch, the manager approached her with a strange look on his face. "Lena," he said, "Mr. Cole called earlier." She froze. "Mr. Cole?" "The man from the other night. He's hosting a big event this weekend at his estate. He requested you specifically to help with service. Said he'd pay extra." Lena blinked, unsure what to say. It wasn't unusual for wealthy customers to request staff they liked. But Ethan hadn't exactly been kind. Something about it didn't sit right. The manager smiled, oblivious. "It's a great opportunity. Big crowd, big tips. I told him you'd be there." And just like that, it was decided. That night, as Lena walked home again, the weight of that conversation hung in her chest. Why would he ask for her? Did he mean what he said about the piano? Was he serious or just planning another joke at her expense? She didn't know. But part of her was curious. Maybe she thought if he wanted her to play, maybe she could finally show him, and everyone like him, that her music wasn't something to laugh at. Still, a flicker of fear stayed with her. She had been humiliated before, but not on the scale someone like Ethan could manage. His world was built on power, and she had none. As she reached her apartment, she paused before unlocking the door. Her reflection in the hallway mirror looked tired but strong. She set her jaw, whispered to herself, "Whatever happens, I'll handle it." Then she sat down at her piano once more, the soft glow of the lamp washing over her as she began to practice. Not because she knew what was coming, but because music had always been her only way to face the unknown. The week moved slowly after that night at the restaurant. Lena tried to push the memory out of her mind, but every now and then Ethan's mocking tone crept back into her thoughts. She replayed the laughter from his table, the smirks, the way he had looked at her like she was a joke. She told herself it didn't matter. People like him didn't understand what it meant to work hard for something you loved. Still, the sting of that moment followed her. By Thursday morning, the restaurant was back to its usual routine. Lena was tying her apron when her manager called her over. He was grinning in a way that instantly made her suspicious. "Good news, Lena," he said, waving a small slip of paper. "You've been requested for a private event this weekend. Big money job." "It's at Mr. Cole's mansion." She blinked. "Mr. Cole?" "Ethan Cole." The manager nodded. "The same." Apparently he liked your service the other night. Wants you at his party. Says he'll pay double the usual rate. I already told him you'd... Lena's stomach tightened. Double pay was tempting. She could use every extra dollar for rent and piano maintenance, but she couldn't shake the unease creeping over her. Did he say why me? She asked quietly. The manager shrugged. Didn't ask. When a man like that calls, you don't question it. Just make sure you're on your best behavior. His parties are high profile. Lena forced a smile. Of course. When the manager walked away, she stood for a moment staring at the floor. The thought of being in his mansion, surrounded by his rich friends again, made her uneasy. She told herself it was just work. She'd go, serve drinks, collect her pay, and leave. Nothing more. The next 2 days passed quickly. Lena spent Friday evening practicing piano, as she often did when she needed to think. The soft notes of her old instrument filled the apartment. She imagined herself playing somewhere grand, on a real stage, not just between the hum of washing machines from the laundromat below. It was her way of staying connected to the person she still wanted to be. Saturday arrived with a bright sky and a cold wind. By late afternoon, Lena stood in front of a massive iron gate that led to Ethan Cole's estate. The house beyond it looked more like a small palace than a home. Wide marble steps, tall glass windows, and cars lined up in the driveway that probably cost more than she'd make in a lifetime. She took a deep breath as the security guard checked her name on the list. "You're with the catering staff?" he asked. "Yes," she replied softly. He nodded and opened the gate. As she walked up the path, she caught glimpses of people in glittering clothes, laughing and holding glasses of champagne. Music floated from inside, live jazz, smooth and easy. The mansion glowed with golden lights and the air smelled of expensive perfume and roses. Inside, the catering team was already busy. Lena joined them in the kitchen, where the head server handed out assignments. She was to serve drinks in the main hall and assist guests during the dinner portion. Simple enough. But when she stepped into the main room, her eyes caught something that made her heart skip. In the corner stood a gleaming black grand piano. It was beautiful, polished to perfection, shining under the soft lights. She couldn't help but pause for a moment, admiring it. It looked nothing like her old one at home, yet it gave her the same feeling. A quiet pull like an invitation. "Nice, isn't it?" a voice said behind her. She turned and found Ethan standing there holding a glass of wine, smiling in that confident, careless way of his. He was wearing a dark suit that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. "Mr. Cole?" she said, trying to sound professional. "Thank you for inviting me tonight." He tilted his head slightly, studying her expression. "Of course. You were the best waitress at the restaurant. I wanted to make sure my guests got the same level of service here." She nodded politely. "I'll do my best." His eyes drifted to the piano again. "Do you remember what we talked about the other night?" he asked casually. Lena hesitated. "About the piano?" He smiled wider. "That's right. You said you could play? Well, here's your chance. Maybe later you'll entertain us with a song." Her chest tightened. "Oh, I'm just here to work, sir. I wouldn't want to interrupt your party." "Nonsense," Ethan said, taking a sip of his drink. "My guests love a surprise. Besides, it's all in good fun." Something in his tone made her uneasy. There was that same mockery beneath the charm. But before she could respond, he was already turning away, greeting another guest, leaving her standing there with her thoughts swirling. The party grew louder as more people arrived. Music played, laughter echoed, and glasses clinked. Lena moved through the crowd gracefully, offering drinks and plates of hors d'oeuvres. Most of the guests barely noticed her, which she preferred. She caught glimpses of Ethan now and then, surrounded by admirers, always at the center of attention. He seemed in his element, confident, powerful, untouchable. Hours passed and the evening turned livelier. The jazz band took a break, and the music switched to something upbeat through the speakers. The guests were tipsy now, laughter spilling easily from their lips. Lena was near the bar refilling glasses when she heard Ethan's voice carry over the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, standing near the piano with a grin. "I think it's time for something special tonight." People turned toward him, curious. The room grew quieter. Ethan raised his glass. "Do you remember that story I told some of you earlier? About the waitress who said she could play piano like a pro?" A few guests chuckled. "Well, lucky for us, she's here tonight." Lena froze. Ethan gestured toward her with a smooth motion. "Come on, Lena, show us what you've got." All eyes turned to her. Her hands trembled slightly as every face in the room focused on her. She could feel her heart racing, the heat rising to her cheeks. I don't think," she began. Ethan smiled, that same sharp smile from the restaurant. "Don't be shy. You said you play. Here's your chance." The guests started to murmur, some clapping softly, encouraging her to go. Others just looked amused, waiting to see how the scene would unfold. Lena knew what this was. He wasn't asking to hear music. He wanted to make her uncomfortable, to turn her into entertainment for his guests. Her instinct told her to walk away, to refuse, but she couldn't. The catering manager stood off to the side, watching nervously. Refusing could mean losing her job, or at least her pay for the night. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Ethan's voice carried again. "Don't worry. If you're half as good as you said, we'll be lucky to hear it." The words made a few guests laugh. Lena's throat felt dry. She didn't remember ever feeling this exposed. Slowly, she set down the tray she was holding and walked toward the piano. The crowd made space for her, whispers following her steps. She sat down on the bench, her back straight, eyes fixed on the keys. For a moment, she didn't move. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the chandelier above. Her fingers hovered just above the keys, and she could almost hear her mother's voice in her memory. Gentle, patient, telling her to breathe before playing. Ethan stood nearby, arms crossed, his smirk unchanged. Lena took another slow breath. "Just play," she whispered under her breath, too quietly for anyone to hear. She pressed the first key. A single note rang through the hall, soft, uncertain, but then another followed, and another, until the melody began to take shape. Her fingers moved more confidently as muscle memory took over. The noise of the room faded. All she could hear was the music, rich and full, spilling out from the piano like something alive. The guests fell silent. Ethan's smirk faltered just slightly as he watched. The girl he thought he was embarrassing wasn't fumbling or shy. She was lost in the music, her expression calm, her hands graceful. There was something in the sound that caught everyone off guard, a mix of sadness and beauty that felt real, not rehearsed. But Lena didn't notice any of it. For her, it was just her and the piano, the way it had always been. Every note carried a piece of her life, the long nights, the quiet hopes, the things she never said out loud. When the song ended, she lifted her hands slowly from the keys. The room stayed silent for a heartbeat longer, as if no one dared to break the spell. Then softly at first came the sound of clapping. It grew louder, turning into applause that filled the hall. Ethan blinked, his expression unreadable. Lena stood, her heart still pounding. She gave a small nod, murmured, "Thank you," and started to walk away, but the guests were still applauding, some calling out compliments. Ethan forced a smile. "Well," he said, finally raising his glass, "that was unexpected." Lena didn't reply. She simply returned to her duties, her face calm but her heart full of something powerful, something she hadn't felt in a long time. For the rest of the night she avoided Ethan's eyes. But she could feel his gaze follow her now and then, quieter, less certain. Whatever his plan had been, it hadn't gone the way he expected. And deep down, Lena knew this was only the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. The air inside the mansion felt heavy after Lena finished playing. The last notes of her song still seemed to hang in the room, faint but alive, like they didn't want to fade. For a few seconds nobody moved. Then, as if waking from a trance, the guests began clapping. Some even stood up, cheering softly, their faces filled with surprise and admiration. Lena's heart raced, not from fear anymore, but from something new, something like relief. She hadn't planned to play, but once she started, she forgot the crowd, forgot Ethan, forgot everything except the music. Ethan, however, stood frozen near the piano, his drink untouched. His smile had disappeared, replaced by a look he couldn't quite hide, part confusion, part disbelief. He had expected her to stumble or freeze up, but instead she had stunned everyone. Around him, his friends murmured to each other in excitement. "Who knew she could play like that?" One said. "She's incredible," another whispered. That was real talent. Ethan forced a laugh, trying to recover his charm. "Well," he said, clapping his hands together once, "that was quite something, wasn't it?" The guest nodded and smiled, still talking about her performance. Lena gave a small nod and stepped away from the piano. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her expression stayed calm. She didn't look at Ethan. She just went back to work, collecting empty glasses from a nearby table as if nothing had happened, but inside her heart was still pounding. She couldn't believe what she'd just done. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Everywhere she went, people glanced at her, some with kind smiles, others with curiosity. A few guests even stopped her to compliment her music. One older gentleman in a dark blue suit leaned in and said quietly, "You have a gift, young lady. Don't ever stop playing." Lena thanked him softly, her cheeks warm. It was the first time in years someone outside her small world had said that. When the party finally began to wind down, she helped clean up, moving quietly among the remaining guests. Ethan stayed near the bar, surrounded by his usual crowd, but he wasn't laughing as much now. His eyes followed her more than once, thoughtful, unreadable. By the time the last guest left, the clock had passed midnight. The catering team packed up their supplies while soft music played in the background again. Lena was stacking glasses into a crate when she heard Ethan's voice behind her. "Lena." She turned, keeping her posture straight. "Yes, sir?" He was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. "You surprised everyone tonight," he said slowly. "I didn't think you'd actually play." "I didn't plan to," she replied quietly. "But you insisted." He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You made quite an impression. People are still talking about it." Lena didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. She could tell he was trying to make sense of it, maybe even regain the upper hand. But something in his tone had changed. It was less arrogant now, more curious. "You really never studied professionally?" he asked. "No, sir. Just practiced on my own," she said. "I couldn't afford lessons." He studied her for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "Well, you've got something rare. Maybe you should do something with it." Lena managed a polite smile. "Thank you." He glanced toward the piano again, then back at her. "You can go home now. I'll make sure you're paid for your time and for the performance." She shook her head quickly. "The playing wasn't part of my job. You don't need to pay me for that." For the first time, Ethan looked slightly unsure. "You're serious?" "Yes," she said simply. "I didn't play for money." He didn't reply right away. Finally, he said, "You're different from most people I meet." Lena gave a small shrug. "Maybe because I don't have much to lose." He opened his mouth as if to respond, but before he could, one of the staff called her name from across the room. She excused herself and walked away, leaving him standing there, staring after her. Outside, the night air was cool and still. The driveway was nearly empty now, except for a few cars waiting for the last guests. Lena pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and started walking down the long path toward the main road. The stars above were faint, washed out by the glow of the mansion's lights. She felt tired but strangely peaceful. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as a nobody, but as someone who could make people listen. She didn't see Ethan standing by the window, watching her leave. The next morning, Lena woke late. Her arms ached from carrying trays, but her mind was full of the sound of applause. She smiled to herself, half disbelieving it had even happened. Her old piano sat in the corner, silent, waiting. She made coffee, sat down, and ran her fingers lightly across the keys. The instrument felt smaller now after touching the grand piano the night before. But the music was still the same. It was still hers. Later that day, she went to her usual shift at the restaurant. The other staff had already heard about the event. Word traveled fast. Paul, the older waiter, grinned as she walked in. "So," he said, "I heard you showed them what real talent looks like." Lena laughed softly. "Something like that," he winked. "Good for you, kid. About time someone reminded those people that we're not just background." She smiled and went back to work. For a few hours, things felt normal again. Customers came and went, orders were taken, dishes clattered. But then around 5 o'clock, the manager came out of his office holding a piece of paper. "Lena," he called. "Mr. Cole sent this." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a note written in neat handwriting and a check. The note said, "Thank you for your music. I didn't expect to be impressed. Consider this a small gesture of appreciation." The check was for $5,000. Lena's eyes widened. She stared at the paper, unsure what to think. That was more than she made in several months. But the thought of accepting it made her uneasy. It didn't feel right, not after how the night started. She handed the envelope back to the manager. "Can you send it back to him, please?" The manager frowned. "Are you sure? That's a lot of money." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "I played because I love to. Not for that." The manager nodded slowly, still looking surprised. "You're one of a kind, Lena," she smiled faintly. "Maybe that's enough." That night, as she walked home, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. The text read, "You're hard to impress, aren't you? I'll be at the restaurant next week. Maybe we can talk about music properly this time." She didn't need to guess who it was from. She turned off her phone without replying. She didn't trust his intentions, and she didn't want to be part of his games. Still, a small part of her wondered why he was reaching out at all. Was it guilt? Curiosity? Or something else entirely? Over the next few days, the restaurant felt different. Some regular customers had heard about her performance and asked her questions. A few even asked if she gave lessons or performed anywhere else. Each time, Lena smiled shyly and said no. She wasn't ready for that kind of attention. But her music had started to reach people even without her trying. One evening, while she was cleaning up after closing, Paul pulled out his phone and showed her a video. "You're online," he said with a grin. On the screen was a short clip from Ethan's party. Someone had filmed her playing. The comments were full of praise and, "Who is she? That performance gave me chills. She's better than half the musicians I've heard." Lena's hands trembled as she watched. "I didn't even know anyone recorded it," she whispered. Paul smiled. "Looks like people finally see what I've been seeing for a while." Lena didn't know whether to be happy or scared. The video had thousands of views already, and it was spreading fast. She turned off the screen and sat down for a moment, staring at the empty dining room. Life had always been predictable before. Work, home, piano, repeat. But now everything was starting to change. She didn't know that across town, in his office full of glass and steel, Ethan Cole was also watching that same video. He played it twice, his expression unreadable, before leaning back in his chair. "She's better than I thought," he murmured. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar. Not pride, not amusement, but respect. The next few days after the party were a blur for Lena. Every time she thought about what had happened, she couldn't decide if it was real. One night she was serving drinks, and the next her performance was spreading online, reaching people she'd never met. It felt unreal. The video wasn't long, just a few minutes, but those minutes showed her heart. People could hear it in her playing, and that alone made them feel something. She didn't know who had recorded it, but she didn't blame them. In a strange way, it was a gift. Still, she kept her life quiet, showing up to work as usual. She didn't tell anyone how the video made her feel. She didn't want to seem proud or expect anything to come of it. But part of her couldn't stop dreaming. What if this was a chance? What if people finally saw her as more than a waitress? At the restaurant, the other workers treated her like a small celebrity. Paul teased her gently every shift. "Our star pianist," he said, grinning as he carried plates to the kitchen. The manager had even started bragging to customers that one of his waitresses had gone viral. Lena only smiled shyly, never saying much. She didn't want the attention, not like that. What she wanted was simple: to play again, on a stage where people truly listened. Then on a quiet Wednesday night, she noticed Ethan sitting in his usual corner booth. He wasn't surrounded by his usual loud friends this time. He was alone, looking at his phone. When Lena approached his table, he looked up and smiled faintly. "Long time no see," he said. "Mr. Cole." She greeted politely. "Would you like your usual?" He nodded. "Yes, thank you, and maybe a few minutes of your time after your shift, if you can spare it." Lena hesitated. "Is it about the party?" "Sort of," he said, leaning back. "Just wanted to talk." She nodded slowly. "All right." She brought his drink, careful to keep her distance. Something in his manner was different tonight. Quieter, less proud. He didn't seem like the man who once made fun of her. Still, she wasn't sure she trusted him. When her shift ended, she found him still sitting there waiting. The restaurant had emptied out and the lights had dimmed. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. "You wanted to talk?" she asked softly. He gestured for her to sit. "Please." She sat across from him, unsure what to expect. "I owe you an apology," he said after a pause. "The night of the party, I didn't invite you to play because I respected you. I thought it would be funny, but you proved me wrong." Lena didn't say anything. She simply listened, her eyes calm but unreadable. I've been thinking about it ever since, he continued. You've got something I've rarely seen. Real talent. Real emotion. You didn't play to impress anyone. You played like you meant every note. She took a slow breath. I play because it's the only time I feel like myself. He nodded. I can see that now. And I want to help you. I have connections, friends in media, event planners, sponsors. I could set up a performance for you, something real. You deserve to be heard. Lena looked at him carefully. Why me? She asked. Ethan smiled slightly. Because it's not often someone reminds me what honesty sounds like. She folded her hands on the table. I appreciate your words, but I'm not sure I want that kind of help. He frowned. Why not? Because it sounds like pity, she said quietly. And I don't want pity. I want to earn what I get. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. You're not easy to convince. Maybe not, she said gently. But thank you for the offer. He smiled faintly. At least think about it, she nodded. I will. He left soon after, but that conversation stayed with her all night. When she got home, she sat by her piano and played until her hands ached. She didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to accept his help. Doors like that didn't open often. But another part of her worried that if she did, people would think she only succeeded because of a rich man's influence. Days turned into weeks. The video kept spreading. She started receiving messages from people she didn't know, students, musicians, even strangers from other countries, telling her how her music had moved them. Some said her playing reminded them of someone they'd lost or of dreams they'd given up on. Reading those messages made her cry sometimes. She had never imagined her little songs could reach so far. Then one morning she received an email from a music foundation in the city. They had seen the video and wanted to invite her to audition for a scholarship program that helped self-taught musicians. The winner would get to perform at a small but respected concert hall. She couldn't believe it. It felt like the kind of opportunity she'd prayed for but never thought she'd get. The audition was in 2 weeks. She practiced every day after work, losing track of time as the sun set outside her small window. Her fingers were sore, but she didn't care. She wanted to be ready, not to prove anything to Ethan, not even to the internet, but to prove to herself that she belonged on that stage. Ethan found out about the audition a few days later. He showed up at the restaurant again, this time with a calm smile. I heard the news, he said. Congratulations. Lena looked up from wiping a table. Thank you. I'd like to help if you'll let me, he said. I can arrange a better piano for you to practice on. You deserve more than that old one. She shook her head quickly. No, I can't accept that. It's not charity, he said. It's an investment in someone I believe in. She thought about it for a long moment, then finally said, if it's really just about the piano, maybe. That weekend, he invited her to a quiet room at his company building where a grand piano had been placed. Use it whenever you want, he told her. No strings attached. Lena hesitated before touching the keys. The sound was deep and full, nothing like her worn piano at home. As she played, Ethan stood near the doorway, listening silently. There was something humble in his expression, as if he too had learned something that night. After she finished, he said softly, You play like you've lived 100 lives. She smiled a little. Sometimes it feels that way. From then on, she practiced there every evening. The janitors got used to hearing her music echo through the hallways after hours. Ethan would sometimes stop by just to listen, never saying much, never interrupting. It became an unspoken routine, her playing, his quiet presence. The day of the audition finally arrived. Lena wore her best dress, simple but elegant, and took the train to the city. The concert hall was smaller than she'd imagined, but beautiful. Dozens of other musicians were there, some with professional training, others with stories like hers. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage, her heart racing. The judges sat in the front row, watching quietly. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and let her fingers begin. The melody filled the room, soft, steady, then growing. It wasn't the same song she had played at Ethan's party. This one was new, written during her late nights of practice. It told her story, the loneliness, the quiet hope, the strength she'd found when no one believed in her. Each note carried emotion, and by the time she finished, the hall was silent. Then one of the judges spoke, voice gentle. That was beautiful, Lena, truly. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Thank you. When she stepped outside, Ethan was waiting near the steps, dressed in a plain jacket. not his usual sharp suit. "How did it go?" he asked. "I did my best," she said softly. He nodded, smiling. "That's all that matters." A few days later, the results arrived. She had been chosen, not just for the scholarship, but to perform at the concert the following month. The moment she read the email, she covered her mouth in disbelief. She had done it. That evening, she sent Ethan a short message. "Thank you for believing in me," he replied almost instantly. "No, thank you for reminding me what belief really looks like." And that night, as she sat by her piano, Lena played again, this time not for survival, not for approval, but for joy. The same girl who once felt invisible had found her light, and she wasn't afraid to let it shine. The day of the concert came faster than Lena expected. Weeks of practicing, late nights, and nervous mornings had all led to this moment. The concert hall glowed with soft golden lights and rows of people filled the seats. For the first time, she wasn't a waitress bringing them food. She was the one they had come to see. It was a strange feeling, one that made her chest tighten and her hands tremble a little. Ethan had helped organize part of the event behind the scenes. He didn't make a big deal of it or tell anyone what he had done. He only wanted to make sure Lena had the support she needed. When he saw her backstage before the show, she looked nervous but calm, her simple blue dress flowing softly around her. "You ready?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly. "As ready as I'll ever be." "You're going to do great," he said. "Just remember what you told me. Play like you're telling a story." "I will," she said, taking a slow breath. As she walked onto the stage, the audience clapped politely. The lights were bright, almost blinding, but she could still make out Ethan's face in the crowd. He wasn't sitting in the front row like before. He was farther back this time, blending in quietly. That made her smile. She sat down at the piano, closed her eyes, and let her fingers rest on the keys. For a few seconds, she did nothing but breathe. Then she began. The first few notes were soft, uncertain, but then the music grew stronger. Each chord carried a part of her journey. The quiet pain of being unseen, the struggle of working late nights, the small hopes that kept her going, and the joy she'd found in the music itself. The room seemed to fade away. There was only her, the piano, and the story she had waited her whole life to tell. People in the audience leaned forward, drawn in by the honesty of her sound. There was no showiness, no fancy tricks, just real feeling. When the final note faded, there was a silence so deep it almost felt sacred. Then the applause began. It started softly, then grew louder until the entire hall was on its feet. Lena stood and bowed, her heart full. She couldn't stop smiling, even as tears welled in her eyes. After the concert, people came to greet her backstage. Organizers, other musicians, even strangers who had been moved by her performance. They spoke of how her playing reminded them of something pure, something real. She thanked them all humbly, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. When the crowd thinned out, Ethan walked in quietly. He didn't clap or cheer. He simply looked at her and said, "You did it." Lena smiled through her tears. "I did." He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a small envelope. "Something for you," he said. "What is it?" "Just open it later," he said with a soft grin. "Tonight is about you." She nodded and hugged him lightly, a gesture filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. After he left, she finally opened the envelope. Inside was a short note and a card. The note read, "A stage is only the beginning. The world needs to hear your music. EC." The card was a contact for a recording studio with a small handwritten line at the bottom. "Your first session is booked, whenever you're ready." She stared at it in disbelief. Ethan had gone out of his way once again, not to control her path, but to open a door and let her choose whether to walk through it. The next morning, Lena visited the studio address out of curiosity. It was a quiet building on a side street with soft lighting and the faint smell of coffee in the air. The manager, a friendly older man, greeted her warmly. "Ah, you must be Lena," he said. "We've been expecting you." She blinked. "You have?" "Yes, Mr. Cole called last week," he said with a smile. "He said you'd be coming soon." "Take your time. The piano's waiting for you." That same day, she recorded a few songs. It felt strange at first, hearing her own music played back through speakers, but it also felt right. Her sound wasn't perfect, but it was real. The manager encouraged her to keep coming, to try different things, to find her voice fully. Over the next few months, Lena's life began to change. The foundation promoted her music on their platforms, and people started recognizing her more often. She was invited to small shows, community events, and charity galas where she could play and tell her story. Every time she sat at a piano, she thought of where she started, the restaurant, the laughter at that first party, and how something meant to humiliate her had turned into the greatest turning point of her life. Ethan kept his distance, respecting her independence. He would send short messages every now and then, simple words like, "Proud of you," or "Heard your new piece." Beautiful. They didn't talk often, but when they did, it was always genuine. One evening, after another local concert, Lena returned home to find a letter waiting for her. It was from a famous music festival in another city, inviting her to perform. They had seen her videos online and wanted her as part of their lineup. It was a huge opportunity, one that could change everything. She immediately thought of Ethan. He had been the first person to push her past her fear, even if their story had started the wrong way. Without his mistake that night, none of this would have happened. She decided to tell him in person. The next morning, she stopped by his office. His assistant led her to the conference room, where Ethan was finishing a meeting. When he saw her, his eyes lit up. "Lena," he said, standing up. "What brings you here?" She smiled and handed him the invitation letter. "I wanted you to be the first to know." He read it quickly, his expression turning from surprise to pride. "This is incredible," he said. "A festival like this. It's a big deal." "I know," she said softly. "And I wanted to thank you. You were part of how I got here." He shook his head. "No, you got here because you never gave up." She smiled. "Maybe. But you gave me the chance to show what I could do." There was a quiet moment between them. Not awkward, just full of meaning. "I'll be there," Ethan said finally. "In the audience cheering for you again." Lena laughed. "You better be." Over the following weeks, she prepared harder than ever. The festival wasn't just another show. It was her first chance to stand among professionals, artists who had studied for years. She didn't have their training, but she had something they couldn't learn from books: heart. When the day finally came, she arrived early, her sheet music tucked carefully in her bag. The stage was huge, the audience larger than anything she'd seen before. She wasn't nervous this time. She felt ready. Backstage, she spotted Ethan among the guests, dressed simply just like before. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and he gave her a small nod. It was all she needed. Her performance that night was unlike anything she'd ever played. The music soared bold and full of life. She wasn't the shy waitress anymore. She was an artist. Every note told her journey, from struggle to strength, from fear to faith. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood again, cheering her name. Afterward, Ethan found her backstage. His eyes were shining with pride. "You've come a long way," he said softly. She smiled, her heart full. "So have you." He looked surprised. "Me?" "Yes," she said gently. "You used to care about how things looked. Now you care about what's real," he chuckled. "Maybe I just needed the right person to remind me." They stood there for a moment, not saying much, both knowing that something had shifted between them. Not romance, not obligation, but deep respect. That night, Lena walked home alone through the quiet streets, her mind replaying the sound of the applause. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was chasing a dream. She was living it. And though she didn't know where life would take her next, one thing was clear. She had turned pain into beauty, humiliation into purpose, and a single cruel moment into the beginning of everything she was meant to be. Months passed after the festival, and Lena's name started to appear in small articles, music blogs, and even local magazines. They called her the waitress pianist, a title she found both funny and touching. It reminded her of where she came from, and she liked that people knew her story wasn't made of luxury or fame. It was made of persistence and quiet faith. The video of her first performance at Ethan's party still floated around the internet, gathering comments and shares. Some people watched it just for the transformation, the shock of seeing someone underestimated rise so high. Others listened because they felt something true in her music. Either way, it spread her story farther than she could have imagined. Despite the growing attention, Lena tried to keep her life simple. She still lived in her small apartment, still made her own meals, and still went for evening walks by the river when she needed to think. The fame wasn't what she wanted. What she wanted was time to create, to write songs that spoke to people, that reminded them they weren't alone in their struggles. One afternoon, she received a letter from a charity organization. They were holding an event to raise funds for children's education and wanted her to perform. The theme of the night was Dreams That Never Die. When she read those words, her heart softened. She knew right away she wanted to be part of it. She called Ethan to tell him. He picked up quickly, his voice warm. "That's a wonderful cause," he said after hearing the details. "Do you need any help organizing?" "I think I'll manage," she said with a small laugh. "But I'd love if you came. You've been part of this journey since the beginning." "I wouldn't miss it," he said. The night of the charity concert, the hall was filled with people from all walks of life. Teachers, artists, parents, and even a few children. Lena walked onto the stage dressed simply, her hair tied back, her eyes calm. She didn't feel nervous anymore. The piano wasn't a place of fear for her. It was home. Before she began, she spoke softly into the microphone. "I used to believe that dreams had an age limit," she said. "That if you didn't make it young, you'd missed your chance. But I learned that dreams don't die, they just wait for the right time to be heard." There was a quiet murmur in the audience. Her words resonated deeply. Then she began to play. The melody was warm and gentle like sunlight on a cold morning. It spoke of small beginnings, of people who worked hard without recognition, of those who still held hope even when life gave them little reason to. Her fingers danced across the keys, not rushing, not hesitating, just flowing naturally. When the last note faded, there was silence, then applause that filled the room like thunder. People wiped their eyes. Even the children sat still, listening to the echo of what she had just played. Afterward, several guests came to thank her personally. One woman, a teacher, held Lena's hand and said, "You reminded me why I do what I do." "Thank you," Lena smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Thank you for listening." Later that night, as the crowd slowly left, Ethan found her standing near the piano, quietly packing her sheet music. "You were incredible," he said softly. She looked up at him, smiling. It felt different tonight. Like the music wasn't just mine anymore, it belonged to everyone. He nodded. That's what real art does. It connects hearts. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. Then he said, "You know, when I first saw you play that night at my party, I thought I was doing something cruel. I thought I was showing everyone a weakness. I didn't realize I was actually showing them a miracle." Lena looked down, her smile soft. "Sometimes life has strange ways of teaching us things." He laughed quietly. Strange, but beautiful. Over the next year, Lena's career grew naturally. She released her first small album, a collection of piano pieces called Unseen Lights. Each song told part of her journey: loneliness, courage, forgiveness, and rebirth. It wasn't flashy or filled with big production, but it touched people. Her album became quietly successful, especially among listeners who found comfort in its simplicity. She was invited to talk on radio shows and podcasts. Everyone wanted to know how she stayed so humble after her sudden rise. She always said the same thing. "Because I remember what it feels like to be invisible. I don't want anyone else to feel that way." Ethan continued to support her from a distance. He had changed too. His parties were smaller now, more meaningful, filled with people who cared about art and community rather than just showing off wealth. He often credited Lena for that change, though she never took credit for it. One afternoon he called her with an idea. "Lena," he said, "what do you think about organizing a free concert for the community? No tickets, no fancy clothes, just music in the open air. For everyone." Her eyes lit up. "I love that idea." They planned it together for weeks. It was held in the park near the river where she used to walk after work. The stage was simple: wooden boards, fairy lights strung across poles, and an upright piano borrowed from the music school. People brought blankets, food, and folding chairs. Children ran around laughing while families settled under the trees. When Lena stepped onto the small stage that evening, she looked out and saw faces from all parts of her life. Her old coworkers from the restaurant, her manager from the foundation, new friends, and Ethan standing near the crowd with a gentle smile. She took a deep breath and said, "I used to play alone. Tonight, I play with all of you." The music that followed was unlike anything she had played before. It wasn't just a performance, it was a celebration of every step she had taken, every person who had believed in her and even those who hadn't. The sun slowly set behind her as she played, and the sky turned shades of pink and gold. The air felt full of peace. When the final song ended, there wasn't loud applause this time. Instead, there was a long, quiet moment where everyone simply sat feeling connected. Then the clapping began. Soft, warm, genuine. Afterward, children gathered around her asking questions about the piano, laughing as she let them press the keys. One little girl looked up and said, "I want to play like you when I grow up." Lena knelt beside her and smiled. "You will. Just keep believing." That night, after